Welcome to the Hour of Empowerment. Today we are in Season 3, which is Organizational Development, and Topic 1, Communication, and we are in Episode 1.
Before we proceed, I would like to summarize what we discussed last week. Last week, if you remember, we concluded Season 2. Civic Education. Let me ask you, what are the three topics we discussed under Season 2? Contributing your share for a democratic society. 2, establishing or re-establishing good governance. And non-violent struggle and civil disobedience in the fight against repression. Today we're going to talk about Season 3, but before we proceed, I'd like to summarize briefly what we discussed in Season 2. You remember Topic 1 was about democracy, and we addressed how it is important to live and operate in a democracy. It is vital to have democracy in your organization it is vital to live and operate in a democracy. There are undeniable benefits you may enjoy when you live in a democracy. However, democracy faces a lot of challenges. We also enlisted the types of democracies in the world. We covered your roles, and we had a wonderful discussion with Professors Devisham and Vikacho Gatapara. Under Topic 2, good governance, we talked about how good governance is a sign of mature democracy. And we uncovered the advantage we may enjoy when we have good governance. We also provided you examples and case studies. The requirements to establish or re-establish the governance and your role. We had also a very fantastic discussion with Drs. Akhil Diara and David Phillips. Under Topic 3, we discussed about non-violent struggle and civil disobedience. We talked about how many people tolerate repression, the methods we can use in the fight against repression, some successful stories around the world, and the factors that are very important to fight repression and your contributions. We had also a very successful and wonderful panel discussion with experts such as Dr. Maciej Barkowski, F.M. Madebo, Professor George Aike, and Dr. Stephen Zurich. Today we're going to begin a new season, which is organizational development. No significant task or assignment can be achieved without a team. But a team requires to have a very effective organizational setting. So we have diverse organizational design to provide for our team. Let me ask you, what are the different types of designs, organizational design?
Let me ask you, what are the different types of organizational designs? Hierarchical, flat, matrix, boundaryless, and so on. In the case of hierarchy, like in military, IRS, and so on. In case of flat, like Disney, Google, and so on. In case of matrix, many of the multinational corporations. Boundaryless, for example, General Electric, and so on and so forth. Organizational design is influenced by what? The mission of the organization, the vision, strategies, and core values and corporate culture. Organizational design also influences the different aspects of an organization or team. What are these factors? Of course, organizational design influences what we just enlisted, and also it determines the performance of your team and organization. If you have an effective organizational design, your organization, your team performs very, very well. Organizational design is also very important to manage your resources, and also in coordinating your human capital. It also influences how you serve your customers. It facilitates learning and growth. It also plays a key role in communication and also in teamwork among your people. It also is very important as you interact with the outside world. Well, whether you have hierarchical or flat organizational design, you should have a very successful communication, team, and values and corporations that promote growth, performance, synergy, growth, and so on and so forth. Therefore, in this season 3, we're gonna talk about communication, team building, and corporate values and culture. Let me give you a little bit background about communication. But before we proceed, I'd like to ask you a very important question. Why should we worry about communication? Why you and me should worry about communication? It is because if we are not skillful communicators, we can't be understood. We can't understand if our partners are not good communicators. So it affects your team, your organization, your department. And also, you can't have healthy relationships if you're not a good communicator. You can't advance your personal and organizational goals. And also, you can learn and grow. So communication is very, very important for your personal and your organizational success. But we need to have a right-sized communication. But it is easier than, let me repeat this, but it is easier said than done. Because sometimes we may under-communicate or over-communicate. Let me ask you, in the majority of the time, are you communicating under or over? Well, it may be very difficult to determine that, especially by yourself. If people provide you some feedback, that's wonderful. But if you are struggling to know whether you are under-communicating or over-communicating, my suggestion is, it is better if you communicate over than under. The main reason is because the majority of the problems we are facing at home, in the workplace, in the marketplace, is not because of over-communication, it is because of under-communication. I like what Les Brown said, one of my favorite motivational speakers. He said that communication is the number one tool to succeed. It determines whether people vote for you, write you a check, invest in what you do, buy your services and products. And he concluded that communication opens up a new whole world to you. He's right, because communication is the key to create and sustain relationships at home, in the marketplace, and at the workplace. Let's define communication using your own words. What is communication? Try it. Because there is no all fit size kind of, let me repeat this. There is no all size fit definition. So try your definition using your own words. We may agree that communication is the ability to connect with others using various mechanisms to achieve our common goals. So communication is not just conveying our message. It should be two-way communication. Let me give you an example. When you communicate through phone, if you are the only one talking, what's going to happen? The other person drops out. Don't let that to happen to you. So make sure that you communicate two-way. Talk some, listen some. So communication is a two-way street. Now the next question is, what are the types of communication we have? What are? At least mention 3 of the communication types. Oral or verbal communication, written communication, visual communication, electronic communication, and social media communication. Let me ask you a question. Among these communication types, which ones have you been using and being successful? Great. Let's talk briefly about oral or verbal communication. Where do we use oral or verbal communication? You're right. In one-on-one conversations, during meetings, speeches, and so on and so forth. What about written communication? In case of written communication, what do we use? Mention 3 written communications. Articles, blogs, emails, texts, and so on and so forth. What about visual? What do you use to communicate visually? Audio visuals, you use audio visuals to communicate. Chalk or whiteboard, computer-aided presentations, and so on and so forth. What about electronic communication? What do we use to communicate electronically? Technologies such as telephone, fax, and so on. Social media, you know about it. Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitters, and so on. Now let's talk about the benefits we may enjoy when we become skillful communicators. What are the benefits we may enjoy personally and organizationally? Of course, the most important benefit is success. We succeed in what we do. We succeed in our relationship. We succeed in our investment. We succeed in everything we do. Because communication is the #1 tool you need to succeed. This is because communication is the key. You can have wonderful talents and skills. You may have wonderful businesses. You may have wonderful products and services and messages. Unless you could be able to communicate effectively, you can't really succeed. Now let me give you 3 specific benefits. When we are great communicators, we achieve our goals with less effort. We overcome resistance or rejection better. We create and retain relationships with ease. Let's talk about achieving our goals with less effort. When we communicate successfully, what happens? We meet our goals. How? By expressing ourselves, explaining our message, goals, products, and services, and by getting something done. At the end of the day, you have to do something so that you succeed. So communication is that tool which helps you to achieve that. Overcoming resistance or rejection. When we communicate well, we could be able to overcome resistance and rejections. Because when we try to communicate with friends, colleagues, and so on, we face rejection and resistance most of the time. So if we are good communicators, at least we could be able to reduce the rate and intensity of the opposition. What about creating and retaining relationships with ease? If you are a great communicator, what happens is that you influence people. But mostly people, before they become interested in your message, in your products, in your services, in what you provide, you want to know you by creating some kind of relationship with you via technology or in person. So if you are a great communicator, you could be able to create and retain relationships. Now let's talk about barriers that may deny us effective communication. So let me ask you, what are the most important, significant barriers that have been sabotaging your communication? If you have some struggle in succeeding in your goals, in your organizational endeavors, and so on, maybe your communication is having issues, problems. So tell me, what are the major barriers you have been facing as you communicate with other people? Tell me at least 3. As you know, there are old and new barriers. They may result in incomplete communication, miscommunication, and or broken communication. The question is, do we know the barriers that have been affecting our communication and resulting in poor communication? Let me give you my own list of barriers. First, ourselves, you and me, are the first and most important barriers for our success in communication. Our message, or using irrelevant learning methods and communication approaches, or communication incompetency, the inability to effectively communicate as we engage with other people, unable to cross the generational gap, or the inability to cross diverse cultures. Last but not least, failure to listen. Now, I have issues with these barriers. We don't have time to discuss them all. The question is, you may not have similar challenges. Your barriers may be different than mine. It's very important to identify your barriers, because the first step of effective communication is knowing your problem, your challenge, your barriers. Let's talk about self. Self is the most thickest and toughest barrier, because we're not just communicating outwardly using our words and gestures, we are also communicating at a deeper level with our mind, with our soul and spirit. What we think and project from within us determines our communication. Our doubts, worries, personality, and character flaws may become jam to our communication. Let me tell you, one of the challenges that I have witnessed within myself and with other people is that when we communicate, we're not just communicating words and gestures and eye contact with people. People sense when we have some kind of thoughts in our mind. For example, if we are judgmental, or if we are some kind of uncompassionate person, or if we have some pride, people sense it. So when we communicate with people, when they sense that we are judging them, or we are not respecting them, that affects our relationships. That's why we need to be self-aware. That's why we first discussed, if you remember, under season 1, the first discussion was self-awareness. You may not be able to avoid all of the challenges you have within a day or month, but knowing the problem, knowing your own personal sabotaging personality or character or some kind of issues within is the first step to succeed in your communication. The second one is message. For that matter, we communicate why? Yes, to extend our message. But we need to articulate our message. We may have a great message, but if we don't be able to communicate and articulate our message, it may become a barrier. Of course, that doesn't mean that we need to appease everybody. Our message should be relevant and useful to the people we are trying to communicate. If it is not useful or relevant, why people should listen to you? But that doesn't mean that we need to please everyone. We should not expect applauses, standing ovations, and a high rate in the feedback form whenever we speak. There are some people who may not want or need our message. Or there are people who may not buy into our message because of various reasons. But the most important thing is we should not fail to tailor and define and refine our message to the people we target. Third, irrelevant learning methods and approaches. Now, with the type of methods and approaches we use to communicate is very important. If we don't succeed here, it may become what? A barrier. For example, if we are trying to communicate with the digital generation, that spend the majority of their time in the cyberspace, we need to combine texts, videos, social media, and so on. Otherwise, we couldn't be able to connect with the digital generation. And also, we need to understand that people learn differently. Some people learn with written words. Some people need images. Some people learn with the stories and metaphors. Still others who are interested in conversation. They don't learn much from written words, images. They want to make conversation. Let me give you a good example. For example, when we designed this program, we thought about it. For example, if you see episode 1s, they are always wordy, We give background, show significance and barriers or challenges. And some people may not be interested because when we give background, most of the time, except a few images, we talk. I talk personally. But when we come to episode 2, we provide reality check, especially those people who are engineers, mathematicians, people who want to, who are curious, who like to check something, evaluate something. We provide them reality check to check their status. Also, we provide them processes and frameworks and so on. When you come to episode 3, what we provide you stories. So if you're not interested in episode 1 or 2, you may be interested in stories. That's why we provide in episode 3 stories. What about episode 4? You may not be interested with words, texts, or reality checks, processes, or stories. So we provide you conversation. We arrange interviews and panel discussions. So if you miss episode 1, 2, 3, if you're not interested with episode 1, 2, 3, you have at least episode 4, where we have conversation with scholars and experts and practitioners. That's how we designed the show, the Hour of Empowerment show. You may not have this kind of show, but in your life, in your home, in your work, in the place where you do business, you need to find out how you communicate with people using diverse methods and approaches. Let me even give you another example. As you see, now I'm communicating through this camera with you because this is a setup. This is the method I have. I don't have any choice. I can't move here and there. I can't really show a lot of passion because the video may become blurred if I move around. But when I am in person, when I'm providing in-person training, I move through the audience. I maintain eye contact, ask questions, and move around and show some kind of passion and gesture. I think you got what I mean. You need to have diverse methods and approaches as you communicate with your audience. But if you use one or a few types of methods and approaches, you may lose a section of your audience. So make sure that you have diverse methods and approaches. Let's talk about communication in competency. You have great message, products and services. You are a good person. I mean, you want to use diverse methods. But if you're not competent to communicate with people, it's very difficult. It becomes a barrier. You need to have competency to communicate using various settings. You should be skillful in writing, speaking verbally, and you should be smart in case of public speaking and when you lead meetings, and also when you have interviews, phone conversations, and when you appear to talk shows. You need to have also platform performance. When you stand up on the platform, you should avoid erratic gestures. If you see me, if you're watching, I'm not making erratic gestures. They are well calculated. You should also avoid looking at the roof or somewhere else. Look at the people you are, whether it is one-on-one conversation or in a group. Try to maintain eye contact. And also you should dress well, okay? Like I do, okay? Of course, it depends on the setting. This is a studio setting, and whenever I do business trainings, always dress like this, with tie and so on and so forth. But there are informal settings. In that case, I may not go with suit. I go there casually. So, but at the end of the day, you should dress well, whether it is formal or informal. It's very important. It affects your communication. Do you really want to listen to someone who smells or someone who is not neat? You don't. Do you want to really talk to and stay longer with someone who has, for example, ice cream on his coat or something? You want to talk and be attentive to a person who is clean, who is smart looking, sharp looking, and you are that kind of person. Now, let's talk about the inability to cross the generational gap. In every setting, you may find out that there are diverse people in terms of age. So you should be able to communicate accordingly. For example, without involving and interacting, you can't really engage the younger generation. And also, if you use slangs heavily, it's very difficult to connect with adults and elderly people. And also, you have to use diverse examples and showcases, because some people may connect with one of your examples, so you have to provide another example to connect with another section of your audience. It's very important. Inability to cross diverse cultures. It is very important, especially in the 21st century. Why I say that? Because in the 21st century, either in person or virtually, you are working, interacting with people from diverse culture. So if you want to be successful in your communication, you should study and understand at least the majority of the cultures that are around you, the dominant cultures. Culture matters. It makes or breaks. It releases or binds your communication ability. Believe me, you may be from a communal culture, like myself. When you communicate with a person from individual culture, for example, when you communicate with Americans, Australians, Europeans, you should know how to communicate with them, because the communication approach you use as you communicate with people from the communal culture, from Africa, from South America, and from Asia is different when you communicate with people from individual-based cultures. So you should be intelligent in terms of your cultural communication ability. These days, in the 21st century, culture shock is common and prevalent more than ever, thanks to globalization and the internet. We are either exposed to other cultures or worked in a culture or visited a culture or at least connected with people using LinkedIn, Facebook, and so on and so forth. So we need to be able to cross cultures and communicate and be effective. So you're a leader, know that you need to be effective in your cross-cultural communication ability. Last but not least, failure to listen. It's very important, especially leaders. We think that communication is about convincing others. It is about oratory. No, it's not. Communication also requires you to listen. You see the picture? If you're not listening, nobody wants to listen to you. You should not talk always your story and your case. You should also listen to the stories and the feedback of other people. That's why I always encourage you to provide me feedback to this program. I believe that you are enjoying it. I believe that you are engaged with me. But if you have some feedback to improve this program, please write me email. It's very simple. My first name and the initial of my last name at gmail.com. assegid@gmail.com. Let me know what I am missing. Let me know what I am failing. Because I can't really communicate with you and help you as a leader, as a professional, as a community leader, if I don't get feedback from you, unless you tell me what I'm doing good, what I'm not doing bad. Some people, especially when they meet me in person, they tell me that they like the program. I'm grateful. But at the same time, I'm also eagerly interested to know your feedback, to let me know where to improve. I got some feedback from some people. They wrote me about using more image, using more stories. I have been trying to incorporate their feedbacks. What about you? What do you want to tell me? So because communication, I should not just always talk to you through the camera. I want to hear from you. I need your feedback. You can go to Facebook, LinkedIn, and tell me. When you like something, talk about it. When you don't like it, let me know. Now I told you about my kids. You should also do the same. You have a spouse, you have a friend, you have a colleague, you have a boss. Know how to communicate, especially know how to listen. To listen to your boss, to your friends, colleagues, your partners, your spouse, and your friends, your relatives. Know how to listen. I used to talk and talk because I thought that communication is about convincing the other person. But a couple of years I understood that I was not listening. Of course, there were people who told me that you don't listen. So I started to listen. Improving my listening skill. So that's why I'm emphasizing to you is that listening is a key to communicate with people. And also, you need to read their unexpressed questions, doubts, and concerns. This is tricky because mostly when we meet people, when we conversate with people, we just listen what they say. Believe me. There are lots of things. There are lots of questions in their mind, concerns. They want to communicate to you, but because of some fear, they don't want to offend you, or they think that this is not time to talk to him like that, or whatever reason, they keep them. So if you are skillful in listening, listen with your heart, not just with your ears. When you do listen using your hearts, what happens? You could be I will repeat it. When you listen with your heart, you could be able to listen what they are not expressing, their concerns, their doubts, especially your close friends, your spouses. You need to listen to them deeply, using your heart. But it's very hard to pick these signals if you are not listening. To listen somebody's doubt, somebody's concern, or unexpressed questions, you need to listen. Otherwise, it's very difficult to pick these signs. I like what Peter Drucker said. He said that the most important thing in communication is hearing what is not said. So when you fail listening, you fail to communicate. So better to listen. That's why I heard somewhere someone said that's why we have only one mouth to talk, but two ears, because listening is the key. That's why we have two ears. Let's use them. But I would like to admit with you that it's very hard sometimes. Even if you transcend these barriers, it's maybe difficult for you to overcome all the communication barriers and be an effective communicators, because some of the barriers you may not have control. For example, you can't upload with your one hand. For example, even if you are listening, even if you are genuinely trying to communicate with somebody else, if the other person is not ready, if the other person is not playing their part, it's very difficult to communicate effectively. So I understand that not all the communication barriers you can transcend, but you should try your best. But discussing details about this is beyond this presentation. Now, the next talk is about how to establish effective communication in your team and in your organization. Let me ask you, what do you use to communicate internally? What are the customs, the communication customs in your team, in your organizations? They are very important. How do you communicate externally, people outside of your organization and team? Do you have a communication strategy? You may say, yes, I have a communication strategy. Well, do all stakeholders understand the strategy? That's the question. Let's talk about how do you use, let me repeat this. Let's talk about what do you use to communicate internally. You need to determine what to use as you communicate your internal announcements, decisions, and priorities. Should you use oral communication, electronic communication, social media, or a mix of them? You should decide. Or should you use your intranet, SharePoint or your website. Because I mentioned intranet because it's very important. Sometimes some of your decisions, some of your announcements should not be announced to other people on your website, because your website is accessed by people outside of your organization. So you should be careful what to communicate in your website. In that case, if you would like to communicate just your people, you need to have intranet. If you would like to communicate just with your team, with your task force, use SharePoint. Should you use notice board, telephone, email as you communicate some special announcements, decisions, and priorities? You should decide. You may use one or more of these communication mechanisms as you communicate internally. But it is very important. If you would like to put everybody on the same page, if you would like to create synergy, if you would like to align everybody alongside your values, alongside your priorities, you need to have an effective internal communication mechanism. Now let's talk about what are the customs. In any organizations, there are norms and taboos that dictate how people communicate in a given organization and team. In some organizations, they encourage formal. In some organizations, they encourage informal communication. You should know which taboo, which custom is enforced in a given organization, because the taboos, the customs in the organization you have been working with may be different than the organization, the team you just joined. So it's very, very important to understand that. Some organizations, they prefer you to use formal chain of command to communicate, some informal. And some organizations, they don't allow you to communicate any issue. For example, some companies, they don't want you to discuss politics and religion. The third one is, how do you communicate externally? The question is, with whom do you communicate? How and who should be responsible to communicate with this sector of your stakeholders? Who should communicate with the media, with government agencies, in the public? You should not just allow everybody in your organization, in your team, to communicate with the media, with the government agencies, and the public. You should decide who. And also, who should communicate when there is crisis and emergency? You should be very careful, because during crisis and emergency, you need to have a very skillful communicator to communicate to your people. You need to decide that person ahead of time before you face crisis or emergency. Now the question is, do you have a communication strategy that guides your communication with your people, other stakeholders? The most effective way of creating communication is to answer the above questions and other communication-related questions by crafting a communication strategy document. But having a clear communication strategy that guides effective communication within and outside is not enough. You should be able to communicate your strategy, your communication strategy, with all the stakeholders. You need to help them understand it. You may need orientations, trainings, even mock exercises, especially if you are an organization, very sensitive organization, or when crisis or when emergencies happen, if there are lots of money or life are at stake, you need to even have mock exercise to see how your communication works, especially in military, in law enforcement agencies. You need to exercise that, see whether your communication is effective and how you react when you are attacked. You should be able to see whether your communication strategy is effective enough to overcome crisis, challenge, and attacks. In conclusion, we need to have right communication, right-sized communication. We should be effective communicators orally, in written, via email, phone, social media. Hear me very well. You are a leader. You're a professional. You may be a business person. You may be even just a person who would like to be successful in life. An individual, a professional. It doesn't matter. Communication is key to enjoy relationships, to enjoy love, to enjoy success. So take communication very, very seriously.
And also, you need to be an effective communicator, all-rounded communicators. You could be effective in writing, but if you are not communicating orally very effectively, it doesn't matter. You may be effective when you talk through phone, but what about as you communicate using social media, through email? You need to train yourself. You need to practice. Believe me, starting from 2000, I have been practicing to be an effective writer. I've used every opportunity to practice writing. I'm now better. I'm still on the learning curve. I'm still improving. But because of practicing writing, I published 2 books. Now at least I know that I can communicate effectively via email and through phone and so on. For example, when I come to this studio, do you think I just come here and just talk? No. I know you don't believe that. I train myself. I practice. English is my second language. So I sit down, think, reflect, to think what kind of questions I should ask you, where to pause, how to pronounce some words, and also to work on my accent. Believe me, I'm in the United States. I may not be able to be a native speaker at all, but I should be able to acquire the American accent and should be understood by Americans and other people from other cultures. To achieve that, I practice every day. You'll be surprised. Every day I practice some pronunciations, I practice some accents. So, to be effective in your communication, you should be able to practice on a daily basis. Because communication is the number one. If you haven't succeeded in your business, if you haven't succeeded in your relationship, if you haven't succeeded in your promotion and so on, maybe you're not communicating effectively. You have a great potential within you. You have great talent and skills. You have something to provide to others, to serve others. But if you're not communicating, it's very hard. It's very hard to help people, to serve people, to get opportunities and change the world around you. So, transcend the most significant barriers. I told you my barriers, but find out your barriers and work on them and transcend them. So my good news is that if you do this, if you know how to communicate, if you practice, at the end of the day, you succeed. Right now, you are a communication away to secure your next promotion. You are a communication away to succeed in your investment, to succeed in your business, and also to take your organization to the next height, your life to the next height. Next week, we're going to talk about a reality check, processes of communication, cross-cultural communication skill, the importance of active listening, and the place of stories to communicate effectively. I can't wait to talk to you next week. Until I see you next week, have a wonderful time. Keep communicating.